Hey, welcome into Shopfix, a community joined together for the love of woodworking. My name is Connor, and in this video, I'm going to detail the entire process of wood turning the vase by using this one as an example. I actually just finished up on it, and in this video, I'm going to show you every single step it takes and explain the entire process. So let's get right into this. Shopfix, it's for the love of woodworking. Alright, so we're going to be wood turning this elm log. And the natural tendency is to set it up on your wood lathe where the spindles meet right in the center point of the rings. Now, on this log, it's almost right in the center, so I think I can actually get away with that. However, you're not going to always be able to do that because the center point of the rings aren't always the center point of the log. And so you have to take a tape measure out and actually measure where the center of your log is when you're mounting it onto your lathe, because you have to get the log balanced. Unless it's a very, very, very small log, then you can get away with it being imbalanced because it's not very heavy. A heavier log than this is gonna have to be balanced. So you're gonna have to measure it and actually get the exact center point of the log. Once you figure out where you need to place your spindle, then you can simply hit it with a rubber mallet so the teeth sink into the wood. Now you'll only need to do that with the spindle that has the teeth. The spindle that comes to a point will easily go into the wood without hitting it with a rubber mallet. Now we'll take our log with the spindle firmly pressed into the wood and mount it at the front of the lathe. Once that's secured in place, we can simply push the other side up against the end and place the spindle right where we need it. Now, before ever starting up the machine, there's three things that I always check. One, I make sure that everything's secure and tight. Two, I rotate the wood and make sure that it's not coming into contact with anything. And then three, I always check and make sure that I start the machine up at a low RPM rate. You'd never want to start a new project up at a high rate of RPMs. Now we can begin roughing out the stock, and we'll be using the roughing gouge. And there's two things you need to keep in mind when doing this. It's the angle of the tool horizontally, and it's also the angle of the tool vertically. So here to here, and here to here. Those are the two things you want to keep in mind. And the proper position is starting out at about a 45-degree angle and then going into about a 35. And you want to begin with it vertically angled as well. So on the tool rest, it's going to look like this. So that's properly horizontally angled at about 45. And then we're going to rotate it vertically to an angle like that. That's going to expose a small percentage of the gouge to cut with. When you go to rough out your stock, you want to pay close attention to any high spots in the lumber, and you'll want to manage those first. Once you've gotten rid of any high spots, then you can go ahead and start from one side and gently work your way across to the other side as I'm doing here to get a uniform shape. If your stock has a pretty thick layer of bark, it's going to be pretty tricky, but once all the bark is removed, your lathe chisel is going to cut much better and you'll be able to take quicker passes and much more uniform passes. From time to time, I highly recommend turning off your lathe to check your progress. In the beginning, before this log was roughed out, I had to start the RPMs at about a 1 or a 2. And as I roughed it out, it became much more stable because it started to become balanced and centered on the lathe spindles. As that happens, you can turn the RPMs up and it can go faster and faster. Now once I keep roughing it out and this lighter part is gone, I'm going to see how much diameter I have left, and then I can plan out the next step. Once your stock has become more uniform and your lathe chisel is cutting much easier, you can open it up a little bit and cut much deeper passes. When using a lathe tool on the tool rest, you want to be mindful of where the ends of the tool rest are, because if your tool ever slips off the tool rest, it will kick back because there's nothing holding it against the wood. With a few more passes, I think we got this elm log looking exactly how we want it. So this will be the bottom, okay? So what I can do here is I can thin out the bottom, okay? And then we can go from thin and have a nice contour going up, and then go out and use the whole width of the log we have right now for the kind of like the upper midsection, and leave that really wide. And then it can dramatically go back in to kind of a flare out at the top. And so that's kind of the design that I want to do here. I think I have enough wood to do it. So let's get started.
So it's a bit counterintuitive here. It seems like I'd be working at the top of the vase here. However, I am actually working on the bottom because eventually we're going to be flipping this over to the other side. Alright, so now that the bottom has been thinned out a bit, and it certainly doesn't need to be in its final shape, but now that that's done, we'll go ahead and part the bottom. The reason that we want to do this is because we need to create a cylindrical ledge for the 4-jaw chuck to hold on to. The great thing is that this doesn't need to be an exact diameter, it just has to fall between the ranges of the 4-jaw chuck.
Alright, we're one step closer to finishing this vase. We now have a nice cylindrical area right here for the 4-jaw chuck to hold on to. Now we can actually remove this log from the 2 spindles because we're going to flip it around and attach it to the other side with the 4-jaw chuck.
To do this, first we'll release the back spindle that comes to a point by just rotating that lever, and then we can remove the log. Next, we'll need to remove that front spindle that has the teeth, and lightly tap it with our mallet to remove that spindle. Then we'll simply screw in the 4-jaw chuck. Once we have the 4-jaw chuck threaded into place, we'll go ahead and place that cylindrical ledge into the opening of the 4-jaw chuck. Then we'll slide the back spindle up against the log to hold it in place while we tighten the 4-jaw chuck. Now that we have the vase properly mounted within the 4-jaw chuck, we'll go ahead and begin shaping the top. The reason I turn my vase tops narrow is because I'm simply drilling a hole out in the top, and so it doesn't need to be incredibly wide. Actually, if I leave it incredibly wide and drill out a small hole, it doesn't look right. Now, you can leave it wide and then actually chisel out the inside, which is one way some people do it. However, I think it's much harder, and it's not necessary because you can still insert a lot of dry flowers even though it's a small diameter hole. If any point during the wood turning process you notice your chisel not being able to cut through the wood as easily and you don't get good shavings, it's liable that your chisel's not sharp anymore and you want to resharpen it mid-project.
So we pretty much have the bottom diameter locked in. It's narrow enough so that we have a gradual rise to the top where it protrudes here. Then we have the contour to the top, and really all we need to do is refine the shape. I'm not going to bother doing anything with the top from here because I think the overall shape of the vase looks great. So we just need to refine the shape. And then we want the top narrow because we're just going to be drilling a hole.
Once I narrowed in the vase top to the diameter that I thought looked best, I went ahead and made sure that the slope was as straight as possible by using a straight edge to reference where it was high, and then simply knocking down those high spots to get a much straighter slope.
Alright, now we have the shape of this vase much more refined with my smallest roughing gouge, and pretty much at this point we just have to get the overall shape much more smoothed up with sandpaper. There's no reason to take any chisels anymore because you're just running the risk of gouging the wood and then your design is pretty much screwed. So right when you get the shape refined and it's smooth enough for sandpaper, I wouldn't bother chiseling anymore because sandpaper is going to clean it up really quick. With a 40 grit sandpaper, this thing's going to get cleaned up really fast. Let's get to it.
The 40 grit sandpaper will make quick work of getting rid of all those chisel lines. However, if you have intricate designs, you have to be careful around those spots because of how much material is removed with the 40 grit sandpaper. While you work with the low grits, you'll actually be able to shape the vase with them because of how much material that is removed. So before moving on to any of the higher grits, this is a perfect time to refine the curves of your vase.
I finished sanding the vase from a 40 grit to 180 grit, and that's plenty high enough for now because the next step is to drill the hole at the top of the vase, and then afterwards we can finish sanding. So for this step, we're going to have to remove the spindle and place on the tapered drill chuck, and then we can drill out our hole.
You'll place in the tapered drill chuck just like you do the spindle. Then you'll want to secure your drill bit in place. For this vase, we'll be using a 1-inch diameter auger bit. It's important to note that this is about the longest bit that you'll need because it pretty much matches the amount of travel that I get out of the back spindle. Make sure when you go to drill out this hole that your lathe RPMs are set to match the diameter of the drill bit that you'll be using. If you get a little bit of smoke at this step, that's perfectly normal. However, if it becomes an excessive amount, you'll want to resharpen your auger bit. After this hole has been drilled out, you'll want to take sandpaper to clean up the edges, and I recommend a round-over look. You'll want to continue shaping the top of the vase and refining that hole until it's exactly how you want. Once the look is achieved, then I would work my way up to higher grits. When you go to sand the vase, you'll want to make sure that you work your way up in increments. So I'm sanding right here with a 320 sanding pad. However, I've already worked my way up from 40. So I sanded with a 40 grit, then 80 grit, 120, 240, and now I'm at 320. The reason why we're diligent about sanding in increments is because we don't want to be left with rough grit lines, which will stand out and be an eyesore once we put on finish. If this process is done correctly, once you get to 3500 grit, you're going to be left with a smooth surface that's already shining without finish.
Sanding from 40 grit all the way up to 3500 grit is definitely not the easiest task, and it's quite time consuming. However, if done right, it leaves the surface of the wood the best it can possibly be. And so this vase is completely sanded and everything's done with it besides finishing, and so that's the next step.
My favorite finish to use for vases is a hard wax finish, particularly the Artistry brand. The natural finish Artistry is one of the best ones you can use. It's easy to apply and the finish is incredible. After the Artistry has been properly stirred, you'll simply apply it with a non-woven pad. One thing that I've noticed when applying Artistry on a wood turning project, and this goes pretty much for any hard wax, is that you actually have to use more than a project, let's say, that isn't on the lathe. Because it's spinning, I think the hard wax has more ability to work into the wood fibers because you're really polishing it in there. And so you'll want to use a little bit more and the finish will look incredible. After allowing the Artistry to soak into the wood fibers for about 20 minutes, then it's time to buff it off. The best material to buff the hard wax is a cotton terry towel. The white color is also recommended so that you can see the hard wax being buffed off. After you fully buff the Artistry, the finish is complete. It's that easy. To remove our finished vase from the lathe, we'll be using a Japanese flush cut saw. This will allow us to get a nice clean cut right where we parted the wood. To catch the vase, I'm using a cardboard box that's lined with a cotton terry towel. Now our vase is only one step away from being fully complete. The final step is to finish the vase bottom, and before we apply some hard wax, we're going to be sanding this so that it's completely flat when rested on a table or whatever surface that's going to be placed on.
Well, from what was once just an ordinary elm log is now a beautiful vase. I've gone ahead and decorated it with these dry eucalyptus leaves, and I think that looks really great. There's a bunch of different options out there for real plant life that's been dried to decorate dry vases just like this one. So that about wraps it up. I know I covered a ton of different topics in this video, so if you have any questions about anything I did or what to purchase to do the exact same thing as I did here, well, just leave me a comment below. And I really hope you enjoyed this video. I definitely enjoyed making this vase, and this is going to be a present, so I'm just glad that I was able to show you the process and also have this beautiful present to give out. So that about wraps it up here today, but I wish you the best of luck with your future woodworking projects. Take care.